It's great to welcome you all back into the room and to welcome again those who are joining us online. Just as we take our seats, it's wonderful to see that we're all ready to rejoin the conversation that was started earlier. I'm going to give us half a minute more as everyone sits down. Wonderful. So, a very warm welcome back to this session on women's empowerment in the Catholic Church, in which we will explore the role and contribution of lay and religious women in the Church, including in the synodal process and in leadership positions at the Vatican and beyond. So our first speaker for this session is Sister Nathalie Becquart, who is the Undersecretary of the General Secretariat of the Synod. Sister Nathalie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, and good morning. And I'm very grateful and delighted to have this opportunity to share with you about women's empowerment in the Catholic Church. So, as you imagine, I will do that with and from the experience of the Synod, and the opening remarks have already opened the path, and I would like to highlight how I have seen that, especially this Synod, has been a process to give more voice to women, and also is a path of empowerment, especially for women. So I would like to highlight that at this stage of our process, after the first session in October, and you know there were a good number of women there, the way we understand synodality is the desire for the Church as God's home and family, a church that is closer to the lives of her people, less bureaucratic and more relational. So you can understand also from what we have heard, why women have really a very important role to play for synodality, are already fostering a synodal church that is, first of all, a relational church. And in many ways, women care for relationship. And the key question is how to be together, men and women, in the society, in the church, in relationships and collaboration. So it's about, this synod is trying to highlight and foster this vision of the church as a church of brothers and sisters in Christ, with this new ecclesial style of listening, dialogue, encounter, and really insisting, one of the key words is inclusion, because it's about participation of all. And it's interesting because we are living this synod after, the synod on young people, the synod on the Amazon, and we have heard about it. And Pope Francis, as many have already highlighted, have already strong words to say that the question of women and women leadership, it's a sign of the time, and the Church has to be attentive to the legitimate claims of those women who seek greater justice and equality. And the Church can support the call to respect women's rights and offer convinced support for greater reciprocity between males and females. And I would like to share with you how, especially this synodal process, in a way, is trying to continue to unfold this path. There is a long way to do still, but I have seen since 3 years how really things are moving forward, and especially it has been recalled, women have been very much involved in the synodal process at the grassroots, in the dioceses, of course in religious life, in lay movements, in many ways. And you have heard a little bit about this international survey, but all the listening and the consultation from all over the world has really highlighted the important role of women in the church. When we speak about women empowerment in the church, in a way, they are already there. And as some women say, they don't need to be empowered. As baptized, they are, and confirmed, they are full with the Spirit. And as women with equal dignity, they have a lot to give. But we see that there is a great desire to participate more in the life of the church, and especially in decision-making process. And that's really the way on which we have to work. And the women have expressed also their difficulties and suffering, how sometimes they don't feel understood or recognized. And also this synod, it's very interesting, and the survey has highlighted that we can't speak about the woman in the church. There are many women in many different contexts with a diversity of experiences. And it's very interesting during the first session at the Assembly about how to open new paths, what can be done, you know. There are the same differences among women than among bishops. It's not on one side bishops or priests who sing, who have a way to sing, and on the other side the women. The women have the same kind of diversity. So it's true, and I think that's one of the first important fruit of the Synod. It has been a sound box for women, and it has been highlighted through all the reports that women are among the groups who feel very often neglected or excluded or not very well recognized, women usually, and young people also. But doing this, this synodal path, so many and many women have said, wow, it's the first time the church is asking my voice. And doing that, I realized, okay, the church is not just the priest and the bishop, it's all of us. So the listening process, and I think that's the most important, we have to help all women, and that's what the Synod is doing, to understand they are and they can be protagonists as baptized. So in our report, you can read the voices of the women, and especially I would like to highlight that in every area of their lives, women ask the church to be their ally. So women don't want just a role, a place, a voice in the church, but in many countries they ask the church to be with them to fight discrimination, violence, and all the problems we know. But all the reports raise the issue of full and equal participation of women. So that's really the issue. And at the same time, the Synod has highlighted in many ways already how women are driving force behind synodality. Many studies also, not only in the church, but in the corporate world, in politics also, highlight that usually, there are many different styles, but usually women have a more collaborative style of leadership. And that's what we need also for synodality. So I would like to highlight, yes, there is still a long way to do, but through this synod, already some kind of milestone have been reached, because there was a strong involvement and still a strong involvement of Catholic women's organization, like WOMCO, UASG. We had women in all commissions for the synod, and also maybe one of the best fruits that I see through this synod that has been really a way to open new experimentations, because my experience is also you don't change things just by documents or speech. It's opening new experimentation, and when really you work better together, men and women, and you see the fruits, people are convinced. At this time, we have every week bishops coming to the Vatican for the ad limina visit, and they also come to our office. At the beginning of the Synod, we have asked that each diocese, each bishops' conference can appoint a Synod coordinator or referent, but preferably a team, if possible with a co-leadership, and a team we have strongly advised, a team with men and women, different vocation. Most of the dioceses and bishops' conference have done that, and sometimes for the first time, instead of just asking one or two priests to do it, they have this team. And now the bishops told us, oh, you know, it's wonderful. I see my synodal team, the way they work, they are such great women dedicated to the church with a lot of skills and lay people, and they are working in such a collaborative way. Now I dream all my pastoral team can be like this. So it's, you know, it's opening new experiences, and I could talk and give many examples of that, including the fact that Pope Francis is appointed, as you see, more and more women in leadership here. Then I receive messages from women who told me, oh, you know, my bishop has seen what the Pope is doing at the Vatican, so now he's appointed more women in leadership position, or I am the first woman as president of a national Catholic organization because our bishop have seen that. So it's also through, you know, new models, new experiences that this synod is working, we can say, or we can say the Holy Spirit is working through those new experiences. And the question that was highlighted for the first session is, how can the church of our time better fulfill its mission through greater recognition and promotion of the baptismal dignity of women? And all the reflection and the experience of the assembly, with also all the women who were there, you see them, and Sister Pat has already spoken about that. It has been a very positive experience, as it is written in the document. For some bishops, they are already used to work with women. There are women in their council, or bishops from France gave a testimony for the whole synodal assembly of a new model that is now more and more embraced by bishops in France. Bishops who have not only a vicar general who is a priest, but a woman who is a general delegate. That means the core governance of the diocese. It's the bishop, the vicar general, and now a lay woman, or sometimes it's also a man. So, you know, 5 years ago, just one bishop started that. Now, almost 15 bishops, and every month there is a new one who is doing that. And this experience was shared in the Synod Assembly. So we need, and that's my last point, to continue to work together, to discern together, and that requires really creativity, audacity, and confidence that we can continue to open paths. And what the Synod is doing, and I conclude with that, especially the women who were at the Synod Assembly or have been involved at a stage of the Synod in commission, and you know, now they are doing a lot, and with a lot of creativity, opening school of synodality, giving talks, organizing a synod on women in one of the Eastern Church. So those women who have been part of the synod, they feel more and more empowered, and they open new initiative with a lot of creativity. So hope it will continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Nathalie, for such a rich and wonderful presentation. It's hard to know what to pick up on, really, but I just want to underline 2 points that I think are really key to our discussion today. One is this idea that we sort of exist in the generative, productive tension of the fact that there is such a diversity of women, and we do want to avoid that risk of, the woman, capital T, capital W, as a single entity. Yet at the same time, we can also recognize and celebrate that women under patriarchy, by and large, have been tasked with holding together the relational fabric of our societies. And so this idea of building a relational church, really is so closely tied to the role that women can play in it. And the other thing that I want to underline as well, because I think it really leads into the discussion that we'll have in the next session too, is this idea of an experiential approach, this idea of praxis as the key to generating the ripple effect that consolidates change. So thank you so much for kind of bringing together all those wonderful reflections. It's my great pleasure now to pass the microphone to Cristiane Murray, who is Deputy Director of the Holy See Press Office. Over to you, and thank you.
Grazie Giulia, grazie a tutte voi, soprattutto agli organizzatori. Sono molto felice di parlare e condividere alcuni miei pensieri con una platea così vasta e ricca, bella. Allora, io non ho un PowerPoint, mi dispiace, spero non annoiarvi troppo. Mentre spesso le luci della ribalta sono puntate sui protagonisti maschili della Chiesa Cattolica, oggi ci addentreremo nella missione, nella storia delle donne, che sebbene talvolta nell'ombra, hanno contribuito e continuano a dare un valido e importante contributo all'opera della Santa Sede. Ne abbiamo una qui accanto a me. Intraprendere questo viaggio ci permette di esplorare non solo la storia delle donne nel nostro ambiente, ma anche le sfide affrontate e i progressi raggiunti nel riconoscere il loro ruolo cruciale. Per capire appieno il presente dobbiamo quindi attingere dalla saggezza del passato. Storicamente il ruolo delle donne nella Chiesa Cattolica è stato vario e complesso. Nel corso dei secoli abbiamo assistito a periodi in cui alcune donne svolgevano ruoli di rilievo, come le mistiche medievali o le figure religiose del Rinascimento. Tuttavia, non possiamo ignorare che ci sono state anche epoche di restrizioni e limitazioni. Quando si riunì il Concilio Vaticano II nell'ottobre del 62, il ruolo della donna nella società occidentale stava mutando in profondità. Solo pochissime donne furono invitate al concilio come uditrici. Quante sfide le donne hanno dovuto affrontare e affrontano tutt'oggi all'interno della Chiesa. Dall'accesso limitato a certi ruoli di leadership all'assenza di rappresentanza in alcune decisioni cruciali. Le donne hanno sempre dovuto superare ostacoli significativi. Attraverso la storia hanno dimostrato una profonda devozione alla fede e una capacità straordinaria di influenzare la comunità cristiana. Da una lettura attenta della Bibbia emerge non soltanto l'importanza del ruolo della donna, ma anche il suo indispensabile contributo alla storia dell'umanità. L'Antico Testamento presenta Sara, la prima matriarca, come un modello di fede. Rebecca è una donna di carattere. Ruth, l'audace spigolatrice. Esther salva il popolo ebraico dai complotti del malvagio Aman. Giuditta, la coraggiosa. Il grande insegnamento delle donne bibliche è che l'accoglienza, l'ascolto e il dono di sé costituiscono la grandezza della persona. La donna nella scrittura trasmette la liberazione e la salvezza. Oggi, in un'era di cambiamento e riforme, stiamo assistendo ad un maggiore riconoscimento e apprezzamento del ruolo delle donne nella storia ecclesiastica. Il nostro viaggio ci porta ora a sottolineare i contributi sostanziali delle donne contemporanee, dall'educazione alla guida spirituale, dal lavoro caritativo alle attività pastorali. Le donne stanno plasmando la Chiesa in modo significativo. Guardiamo alle donne di oggi, con le loro caratteristiche uniche e preziose. In un'epoca di cambiamenti sociali e progresso, le donne contemporanee dimostrano una straordinaria resilienza e versatilità, e dal mio punto di vista portano in Vaticano una prospettiva fresca e innovativa. Perché? Perché le donne di oggi si distinguono per la loro capacità di navigare agilmente tra tradizione e modernità. La loro sensibilità alle questioni sociali, la compassione, la prospettiva inclusiva sono essenziali per affrontare le sfide contemporanee e la presenza femminile, caratterizzata da una combinazione di intuizione, empatia e determinazione, offre un contributo inestimabile all'orientamento della Chiesa nella complessità del mondo di oggi. Come vediamo anche in altre sfere, come nell'istruzione, nella gestione delle risorse, nelle attività caritative, l'impegno delle donne ha concretizzato iniziative innovative e la costruzione di ponti tra la Chiesa e la società. Riconoscere e valorizzare nelle donne le loro caratteristiche di saggezza e discernimento come distintive è fondamentale per comprendere appieno il loro apporto, imprescindibile oggi, per la costruzione di un futuro in cui la diversità sia accolta come un dono e non come una sfida. La diversità di genere non solo rappresenta un principio di giustizia e eguaglianza, ma offre anche una prospettiva unica che arricchisce la comprensione e la dinamica organizzativa. In 10 anni di pontificato, 11, Papa Francesco ha tante volte parlato di donne e del loro contributo in ogni ambito. Una delle citazioni più belle per me, attinenti al titolo dell'evento che stiamo celebrando oggi, la fece l'8 marzo del 2019, 5 anni fa. Cito: «La donna è colei che fa bello il mondo, che lo custodisce, lo mantiene in vita, vi porta la grazia che fa nuove le cose, l'abbraccio che include, il coraggio di donarsi, la pace è donna. Nasce e rinasce dalla tenerezza delle madri e perciò il sogno della pace si realizza guardando la donna. Non è un caso che nel racconto della Genesi la donna sia tratta dalla costola dell'uomo mentre questi dorme. La donna, cioè, ha origine vicino al cuore e nel sonno, durante i sogni. Perciò porta nel mondo il sogno dell'amore. Se abbiamo a cuore l'avvenire, cita il Papa lo dice, se sogniamo un futuro di pace, occorre dare spazio alla donna. Questo spazio, come chiede il Papa, ci viene dato però solo quando veniamo, e qui andiamo un po' nella pratica, quando veniamo segnalate nell'ambito del lavoro. Perché il Papa decide chi scegliere e per quale posizione di rilievo, ma alle volte, quasi sempre, è un nostro superiore che va da lui e gli dice: c'è una donna adatta a tale ruolo di dirigenza. Nel mio caso, come credo per quasi tutti, è stato il prefetto del mio dicastero a farlo. Quello che voglio dire è che lì ci vuole, al superiore, un discernimento, un onesto discernimento, per decidere e portare il proprio parere al Papa. Perché una donna non deve essere nominata in quanto donna, ma perché in quella posizione di dirigenza, in quel determinato momento storico, ci vuole una persona con specifiche caratteristiche. E questo può essere noto solo alle persone con cui si lavora e non sempre direttamente al Papa. Ci vorrebbe quindi un maggior discernimento da parte dei nostri superiori. Io sono stata segnalata, per esempio, da dottor Paolo Ruffini, che ringrazio. La distinzione di noi donne in un ambiente di lavoro prettamente maschile non solo risiede nella competenza professionale, ma anche nella ricchezza che portiamo con la diversità del nostro pensiero e la sensibilità relazionale. Riconoscere e abbracciare questa distinzione non è solo un atto di equità, ma è anche una mossa strategica per costruire organizzazioni più resilienti e orientate al successo a lungo termine. Al Dicastero per la comunicazione, il nostro consiglio direttivo si riunisce ogni settimana alla presenza del prefetto, del segretario e di tutti i direttori. A queste riunioni c'è la mia partecipazione insieme anche a quella della dottoressa Natasha Becquart, direttore teologico pastorale. Si affrontano in quella sede diverse problematiche ad ampio raggio, anche non prettamente legate alle nostre direzioni o prettamente legate a competenze femminili, come per esempio, tra molte, la ristrutturazione di Palazzo Bio o l'acquisto di un camion per trasmissioni via satellite, con l'obiettivo di divulgare le attività del nostro dicastero, di accogliere suggerimenti e condivisioni. Per questo si fanno i consigli. Quindi è bene per tutti conoscere ogni aspetto del nostro lavoro ed è importante che la presenza femminile ci sia, non solo per la diversità di genere, ma, senza modestia, per la capacità di affrontare le sfide con creatività, empatia e resilienza. Tutto questo aggiunge una dimensione preziosa all'ambiente lavorativo. In un panorama professionale che può talvolta essere caratterizzato dalla competitività e dalla fermezza, la prospettiva femminile introduce un approccio collaborativo, come ha detto anche Suor Nathalie, tale da contribuire al successo collettivo, grazie alle dinamiche relazionali che si riescono ad instaurare. E infatti il clima creato nell'ambiente di lavoro, basato sempre sul rispetto, la fiducia, la comprensione reciproca, è l'aspetto relazionale più importante. Quando esiste la collaborazione tra uomini e donne, si realizza pienamente la missione nella Chiesa e altrove. Uomini più donne uguale a umano. La forza delle relazioni è al centro della fede cristiana. La capacità innata delle donne di costruire connessioni profonde, autentiche, contribuisce a plasmare la comunità ecclesiastica, che riflette gli insegnamenti di amore, compassione e solidarietà. Quindi la diversità di genere non solo apre la strada a una gamma più ampia di talenti e competenze, ma promuove anche un clima di lavoro in cui la comprensione reciproca e l'apprezzamento delle differenze sono incoraggiate. Questo non solo beneficia le donne coinvolte, ma migliora anche la coesione del team e l'efficacia dell'organizzazione nel suo complesso. Quando purtroppo, però, qui apro una parentesi, si parla di donne di nomina papale presso la Santa Sede, esse vengono immediatamente associate al potere. Si dice donne di potere. Lo stesso però non vale per gli uomini. Si mette in risalto la prescelta come se da quel momento in poi venisse ricoperta da un'aurea di potere. Si tratta invece di servizio, di responsabilità e non di chissà quale potere. Una parola che a me incute, almeno a me, un certo timore reverenziale. Ricordiamo anche che tradizionalmente qualità come la grazia, la delicatezza, la cura, l'empatia, la gentilezza, queste qualità vengono sempre associate alla femminilità. Tuttavia è importante notare che queste caratteristiche non sono intrinsecamente legate al genere, ma sono costruzioni sociali che possono essere sperimentate ed espresse anche da individui di sesso maschile. Non ci offendiamo, non ci offendiamo se i maschietti sono gentili o graziosi, anzi, no? Ancora di Papa Francesco sono le parole: la femminilità è così necessaria nella Chiesa e nel mondo. La forza per affrontare le difficoltà, la capacità di concretezza, una naturale disposizione a essere propositive per ciò che è più bello e umano secondo un piano di Dio e una visione lungimirante del mondo e della storia. Le nomine di donne, quindi, possono aprire nuove strade, introdurre prospettive innovative che contribuiscono a rompere stereotipi e a sfidare convenzioni, portando così a una crescita e a un'evoluzione organizzativa. Come afferma il Papa, le donne costruiscono una società più umana con il loro sguardo e cuore. Quindi riconoscere e celebrare la forza delle relazioni che le donne portano nella Chiesa è fondamentale per costruire comunità ecclesiastiche che rispecchiano l'amore e l'accoglienza. In chiusura, riflettiamo su quanto emerso. Le donne hanno sempre avuto un ruolo fondamentale nella storia della Chiesa. Che dire di Maria o di Maddalena ai piedi della croce, al sepolcro? Questo ruolo va riconosciuto e celebrato. Il loro contributo è un'ancora di stabilità in un mondo in continua evoluzione. Guardando al futuro possiamo immaginare una Chiesa in cui il talento e la devozione delle donne sono pienamente riconosciuti. L'inclusività non è solo un valore moderno, ma una componente essenziale della visione di una comunità cristiana vibrante e aperta. Quindi grazie a tutti voi per aver dedicato il vostro tempo a esplorare insieme questo cruciale aspetto della vita ecclesiastica e che la nostra riflessione possa essere il seme di una discussione più ampia e di un cambiamento duraturo. Grazie.
Grazie, Cristiane. Thank you so much for sharing with us some of the nuts and bolts, I think we can say, of how women's leadership works in your context. And this idea that the creativity and empathy and resilience that characterize women's leadership do not only serve to inform us on women's issues in big inverted commas, but also serve a purpose when we're talking about refurbishing a building or renting a van. I think it really speaks to this idea that including women in leadership can diversify our working culture and our leadership culture in ways that are beneficial across the board. So thank you so much. It's now my pleasure to pass the microphone to Patricia Adèle Félicité, who is the Secretary General of Caritas in Mauritius. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bonjour à tous. Merci à vous de nous avoir rejoints ici et aussi bonjour à ceux qui nous écoutent à travers les réseaux. Alors, ce matin, moi, je vais vous donner mon témoignage de mon parcours comme femme, comme laïque dans l'Église. Je suis un laïque engagé depuis mon enfance et mon adolescence dans ma paroisse. Ce qui m'a construit et façonné, c'est la formation des laïcs dans mon diocèse. Les mouvements de l'enfance et groupes de jeunes ont été des pépinières qui ont permis aux filles comme aux garçons de voir, juger, agir, de s'engager et de dénoncer les injustices de notre société. Voilà ce dont notre Église a besoin. Car c'est à travers ces rencontres, ces échanges, ces formations qu'est construite l'Église de demain. Des leaders dont notre société a besoin. Nous avons beaucoup entendu parler du synode depuis ce matin. L'Église synodale que nous parlons, c'est une Église où jeunes et moins jeunes, femmes et hommes, laïcs, religieux et religieuses peuvent apporter leur contribution, être dans des instances de décision et mettre leurs talents et compétences au service de nos frères et de nos sœurs. En tant que laïque engagée, j'ai eu la chance de côtoyer des curés de paroisse et un évêque qui croient dans la capacité et la contribution des femmes. En tant que femme laïque en poste de responsabilité, et je ne dis pas de pouvoir, j'ai été appelée à compléter mes études au séminaire en même temps que des séminaristes de notre conférence épiscopale, celle de l'océan Indien. En tant que directrice de la Caritas de mon pays, j'ai l'occasion de contribuer à la formation des futurs prêtres dans le domaine social et aussi dans la pratique pendant leur temps de stage en paroisse. Cette position me donne aussi l'occasion d'accompagner et de former les instances de gouvernance des paroisses à l'organisation du service de la charité. Dans beaucoup de nos pays et nos instances dans l'Église, nous voyons encore malheureusement la marginalisation des femmes et surtout à cause de la nature cléricale de nos institutions. Je veux ici vous citer le pape François au Conseil des cardinaux le 6 et 7 février dernier et sa réflexion sur le rôle des femmes dans l'Église. Début de citation. La présence et la contribution des femmes à la vie et à la croissance des communautés ecclésiales par la prière, la réflexion et l'action sont des réalités qui ont toujours enrichi l'Église et qui constituent même son identité. Pourtant, nous nous sommes rendus compte, en particulier au cours de la préparation et de la célébration du synode, que nous n'avons pas suffisamment écouté la voix des femmes dans l'Église et que l'Église a encore beaucoup à apprendre d'elles. Nous devons nous écouter les uns les autres pour démasculiniser l'Église, car l'Église est une communion d'hommes et de femmes qui partagent la même foi et la même dignité baptismale. En écoutant vraiment les femmes, nous les hommes, écoutons quelqu'un qui voit la réalité sous un angle différent. Et nous sommes ainsi amenés à revoir nos projets, nos priorités. Parfois, nous sommes déconcertés. Parfois, ce que nous entendons est si nouveau, si différent de notre façon de penser et de voir, que cela semble absurde et que nous nous sentons intimidés. Mais cette perplexité est saine. Elle nous fait grandir. Il faut de la patience, du respect mutuel, de l'écoute et de l'ouverture pour vraiment apprendre les uns des autres et avancer comme un seul peuple de Dieu, riche de ses différences, mais marchant ensemble. Fin de citation. Voilà notre souverain pontife qui nous montre le chemin à prendre pour oser l'empowerment des femmes dans notre Église. C'est à travers l'écoute qu'il nous propose de faire ce chemin. Au sein de notre confédération Caritas, depuis l'avant-dernière Assemblée générale, nous avons pris des décisions fortes parce que c'est souvent les prêtres qui sont directeurs de nos Caritas, les évêques qui sont les présidents, et finalement, dans les instances de gouvernance, nous retrouvons que les prêtres et les évêques, et très peu de laïcs, et encore moins de femmes. Et suite à cette décision forte de la Confédération de vraiment nommer des femmes dans les instances de décision, j'ai été appelée à siéger sur un comité international pour le leadership des femmes. Et une de notre première actions a été de vraiment voir ce qu'était la réalité dans nos différentes organisations. Alors, une enquête a été effectuée en 2022 avec la participation de 110 organisations membres sur 162. Ça reflète presque à peu près 68% de la Confédération. Et nous avons constaté les résultats suivants. Il y a un équilibre de 52% de femmes et de 48% d'hommes qui travaillent dans l'ensemble de la Confédération. Quand on dit qui travaillent, ce sont les full-time, les personnes qui sont employées dans nos différentes organisations. Toutefois, lorsque les résultats sont ventilés par poste au sein de ces organisations, ils montrent que les femmes sont systématiquement moins présentes dans les postes de direction et dans les organes de gouvernance. Au niveau des directeurs, ou à l'équivalent, il y a 72% de ces postes qui sont occupés par des hommes et 28% par des femmes. De même, les organes de gouvernance sont composés de 67% d'hommes et de 33% des femmes. Par contre, au niveau de l'encadrement supérieur, les directeurs de programme et de personnel des organisations membres, les règles du jeu s'équilibrent. Les femmes représentent respectivement 43% et les hommes 53% de ces postes. Alors, nous avons ensemble réfléchi en tant que confédération en tant que femmes engagées dans notre confédération et nous avons aussi pris l'engagement de renforcer la présence des femmes au niveau le plus élevé de la gouvernance et de la direction dans plusieurs domaines. Et je pense que pour l'empowerment des femmes dans l'Église, nous devons aussi renforcer la présence des femmes au niveau le plus élevé de la gouvernance et de la direction, et un domaine d'action prioritaire pour promouvoir l'égalité entre les hommes et les femmes dans la prise de décision au sein de nos différentes instances de l'Église. Merci pour votre écoute.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for highlighting, as you quote, that we have not yet heard enough of the voice of women in the church, for highlighting that patience and mutual respect and also listening are such a key part of moving forward on this journey. And thank you for leaving us with some numbers. I think we can all resonate with the idea that in a context where men represent 48% of employees, they might represent 72% of director-level roles. I think we've all been there in those contexts, and so it's good just to be reminded of the reality that we face. So before we go to our Q&A session, I'm delighted to pass the microphone to Dr. Maeve Heaney, who is the director of the Xavier Centre of Theology at the Australian Catholic University. Thank you for joining us.
I am grateful to be part of this day's reflection as a religious and as a theologian. Catholic doctrine and theology clearly invite us to an intelligent collaboration between religion and state, policy and theology, and there are shared values, journeys, and insights that need to be tapped for the good of all. These kinds of conversations are essential. My aim in this brief contribution as a theologian is double: to reflect upon why women's leadership in the Church is a theological issue in 3 areas, and to invite us to imagine things and God differently, as well as to suggest why this is important. By way of premise, I'd like to say theology can sound like a specialized field reserved for minorities who study a lot and like obscure terms. I beg to differ. I contend that theology affects how we live, move, and breathe, and that it feeds off real questions. Women in leadership, why not, and how, is one of them. So what are the key theological issues at the heart of empowering women's leadership in the Church? I'd like to name 3. The first is the issue of authority and governance in the Church and how it relates to ministerial priesthood. In 2013, in Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis issued a call for, and I quote, a more incisive female presence in the Church, and asked pastors and theologians to reflect upon the possible role of women in decision-making in different areas of the Church's life. It is obvious that we are taking steps. But why was the request made in that way in the first place? Because, in its current form, our theology of ordained ministry, bishop and priests, links decision-making in all spheres to ordination. And yet, in our baptism, we are introduced into Christ and called prophets, priests, and kings. Let's call this governance. That is to say, that in the fields of teaching and preaching, prophecy, worship, bridging others to God, priesthood, and governance, oversight of the reign of God, we all have a role to play. But what is that role? That is the question. I believe that we have forgotten, and hence the importance of imagination, that in Catholic doctrine there is only one priest, one mediator between God and humanity, and that's Christ. This is the core of our faith. Through baptism, we all share in that priesthood in some way. I am not suggesting we do not need the ministerial priesthood, presbyterate. As a human divine structure, the church needs leadership and organized governance. It needs people who are formed, trained, and ordained to do this ministry. But what it looks like can change. And I don't think this is just about saying women should be allowed, although neither am I saying they should not. But that is not the issue I am identifying. It is about how we imagine the priestly role. We need some robust scriptural, theological, and historical reflection on baptism and on the ministerial presbyterate so as to untie the knot between governance, power, and ministerial priesthood, and thus allow women and other lay help us to make church structures and agencies more effective, collaborative, and hopefully more in line with how Jesus imagines his body. In practice, this is already beginning to happen, but it is hindered by bad or incomplete theological frameworks, which leads me to my second point. The theological anthropology underpinning leadership. This is a really debated issue right now and affects not only how men and women relate, but also how women see themselves and other women in the church. In my opinion, and I own this, certain theological anthropologies, that is to say, ways of understanding the human person, essentialize too much what men or women bring to the table in ways that are unhelpful and not reflective of real human experience. And thank you, Cristiane, for naming this for us. They speak of complementarity, which can be true, but sometimes name the contribution of women as essentially different to that of men, pitching love, spirituality, and nurturing against authority, leadership, and intellect. Now, I'm not suggesting that there are no differences between women and men. I'm simply asking us not to radicalize or essentialize them. This kind of complementarity theology is drawn from a significant theological figure of the 20th century, Hans Urs von Balthasar, a genius in his own right, whose work on beauty I use a lot, but who never worked in the academy, self-published his whole life, and whose work, therefore, did not have enough checks and balances. His theological anthropology, in my opinion, is incomplete, as it overemphasizes the maleness of Jesus and the femaleness of the church, presenting women as receptive and spiritual, the counterpart and at times answer to men's more proactive and intellectual nature. We know that this is not true. However, his writings have had huge influence over the last 30 years. The value of this theology is obvious, but it needs more critical reflection. And especially, I'd like to suggest dialogue between those of us who like this anthropology and those of us who do not is the essential work to be done to move forward together. There are different ways of understanding and performing collaborative work. There's more than one gender ideology. Which leads me to my third point. The reality of who God is and how we imagine God. Reflect upon whether in that space of how we imagine you inserted the word him or not. I'll start with an example. One of my nieces, who was alienated from the church for a long time, is seeking and finding her way back. She is artistic, intelligent, free, yoga-loving, a mother. She called me one day to tell me she prays every day and starts thus: in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, in the name of the Mother and the Daughter and the Holy Spirit. I'm not suggesting we change Trinitarian theology based on her insights. But I am suggesting that we realize that the faith and future female leadership in the church depends on our capacity to rethink and to reimagine God and our church differently. Jesus was a man, and I like him. This is true. And why he was a man is a theological issue that draws the interest of many right across the Catholic intellectual spectrum. However, it is doctrinally incorrect to say that God Creator or the Holy Spirit are male, or female for that matter. And I know that one of the most significant names we use for the first person of the Trinity is Father, a name I use in prayer. But it is a name, a metaphor, a loving development in scriptural understanding by which Jesus began to teach us of a God as loving, close, caring, a father who loves both his children, a mother who cleans the house to find all the lost coins. But it names a God who cannot be held in one name. Pope John Paul I's short time with us left us this legacy. God is Father and Mother. How we imagine God matters. Imagination is not superficial, but how we grasp things. We are hosted also by the British Embassy. John Henry Newman, one of England's most eloquent of saints, used real and imaginative as synonyms. This might seem like a simple issue, but it is actually, in my opinion, the deepest and hardest to change. To quote one of the Catholic Church's most significant thinkers in this field, Sister Elizabeth Johnson, CSJ, the problem is that the symbol works. If God is male, then the male is God. This is too limited to reflect the God in whose image and likeness we are all made. There is much more to be said, not least that it is not easy to broaden our understanding of the one who brought us to life, as no one image will work, but we owe it to the future generations. 2 short points to end, and it has already been raised by some of my companions. We need to educate theologically our future women leaders. I work with a group of colleagues in this endeavor, Women's Leadership for Mission. It's a short program, and there are multitude, and they are growing, but we need to educate theologically our leaders of the future. We need to invest, which also implies financially, in good theological education as it changes how we see and what we think is possible. And secondly, and finally, this is about the future leadership of the Church and in the Church, but it is also about the very faith of the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much for what feels like a whirlwind and deeply kind of enriching introductory class, such a grounded perspective on theology and its very real-world application to the empowerment of women in the Church. I think also I want to thank you especially for such a masterclass in nuance, this idea that we can and should raise the most difficult and thorny questions that face us all in a spirit of encounter, of dialogue, of conversation, of possibility. It's such a beautiful and I think, empowering way to approach these difficult issues. So I'm very excited to say that we have now reached the Q&A part of this session. So we're delighted, of course, to be able to hear everyone's voices, or as many people as possible, as many as would like to participate. So we will be taking questions and reflections from the floor. We do have colleagues who can pass around a microphone if you raise your hand. At the back and kind of around you. So I think I'll give us a 30-second break just to take a sip of water and reflect and think about any questions, and then we'll open the floor for discussion. So, with renewed thanks to this wonderful panel for setting us up with such rich ideas and such fruitful opportunity for discussion, for conversation, I'd be very happy to start taking questions from the floor.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm Cindy Wooden. Professor Heaney, that was kind of wow. The Pope keeps using von Balthasar and the Petrine principle and the Marian principle, even though the presentation, I think in December at the Synod to the cardinals on the C9, which they've published as a book, kind of destroyed that as a valid and, I guess, adequate description of the roles of human beings in the church, emphasizing especially the Johannine principle, which is to be the beloved disciple and not necessarily male, female. Anyway, I was just wondering what you think of the fact that the Pope, even after the December meeting, continues to say that there is this Petrine principle and Marian principle. The church is woman, and that is more important. And the implications of saying that it's more important to kind of be the loving woman servant as a way of kind of dismissing claims for a share in decision-making, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Just a few thoughts. You know, I think synodality or a synodal process, we're only beginning to realize what that means. I have to say, I am tremendously grateful for the call and the journey of this particular pontificate in relation to women with what's happening and what's being called for. Having said that, I think sometimes we ask too much of one person, and I'm not saying that just about Pope Francis. I think sometimes we look to our leaders and we expect them to do everything they can. A pope will have 1, 2, 3 insights because we're human beings even as we lead. Therefore, I see a journey. It's true, for example, I don't resonate with that theology. I think it has things to offer us, and that's the difficult, nuanced position to sit in. Can we say there's something that can be offered there, but also contribute more? I think even when a pope, not every word that comes out of a pope's mouth, I love Pope Francis, can I just say this? But not every word that comes out of any pope's mouth is magisterium. We all work out of a culture. We all work out of a theological training. When I said 30 years of influence, I meant everybody. We have all been theologically formed in different ways. We all need to keep update with that, even the popes and the bishops. Vatican II was interesting because theologians and bishops worked together right the way through. In the Synod, we're doing it a little bit, but to be honest, as theologians, we'd like a little bit more interaction there. We'd like to inform a little bit more there because we cannot expect bishops to keep on the top of every journey in theology. So I think it's about how we understand collaboration and different roles. Thomas Aquinas spoke of 2 magisterium, the magisterium of bishops and the Pope, and the magisterium of theology. I'm not suggesting they fight. I'm suggesting they have a shared role in what happens. I know when I hear some words, I kind of go, not sure I agree with that, but it doesn't mean the intentionality isn't moving in the right direction. And I think there is work to be done. And I think it is a hard work to be done. And to be honest, I really meant what I said. We need to get around the table, researchers and women, I'd say especially, as well as men, to talk through why we resonate with one and why we don't, and to pull theological threads. I think there's work to be done there for our bishops and for our popes.
Thank you. I'm just going to remind us all to speak as slowly as we can for the interpreters. It's okay. When we get caught up in discussion, it's harder. But let's remember those who are listening online. So I think we have another question there. If someone can hand over a microphone. 2 questions. So whichever order is easiest for the microphones.
Thank you very much for this wonderful meeting. And I would like to ask Sister Nathalie if what Pope Francis is asking to the dicasteries to work together and to think about the open matters that are not yet proposals or convergences, how they will be picked up during the assembly, because there's some information that says that the work they are doing or they have to do is not to be introduced during the assembly. Could you please speak a little bit about this? Because there's a lot of women that are really involved, and well, we would like to know that, please. Thank you.
To answer you, I would like to draw from what Professor Maeve said. You know, we have different levels regarding all this question of women leadership, women's role. It's also about a change of culture, and we have to be aware of that, of culture in our society, in the church. Those are links, and when you see the Me Too movement or other things, you know, we still have the change of culture is not already there. So I say that because we see also with the synodal process, and I have tried to highlight it, and with this pontificate, some steps have been undertaken, but it's a long process that has to be continued, and it's very interesting because everything in a way is interrelated. That means our ecclesiology, our pastoral practices are linked to an ecclesiological vision that is, and the synodal ecclesiology is completely articulated with a relational anthropology based on this vision of reciprocity. So that's why for the next session, there will be some issues that will be really taken off with study groups and also with the work on the Instrumentum Laboris, with everything that will come back from the consultation that is now done in the local churches. And other topics needs more deepening and theological reflection, as we can see. That's why they will need some more time. I won't say more because probably you will have rather soon more news about all of that. But that's why it requires both boldness, audacity. Let's try to take all the steps we can already take. And at the same time, we need to continue the discussion to deepen the theological reflection and have this also this intertwining between practices, new experiences, and theological reflection. I think that's a way, and we can all be part of that.
Thank you, Sister Nathalie. We'll go to the question at the front.
Thank you so much for all the speakers, for your very insightful stories and the remarks. Every speaker, what every speaker says comes very close to my heart. My name is Hyunju Oh, Korean ambassador of Korea to the Holy See. I took up this position a year ago, and when my appointment was announced, it was widely carried by the Korean media, just simply because I am the very first Korean ambassador to the Holy See. So if I just paraphrase what the sister Patricia Maurice says, that I just looking for the day when the women issue is no longer a news issue. I've been in the service for almost 3 decades in the foreign service, and looking back, those days I still have I could never depart from the feeling of kind of a sense of marginalization, even when I reach up to the ambassadorial level in my service. I think it's mainly because that there is still, of course, there are chances for the women departments and women officials and the diplomats to reach up to the very highest level, including the decision-making level. But still, there is a invisible kind of a division of responsibility, division of portfolio between male colleagues and female colleagues. So while all the male colleagues deal with all the so-called hard issues, including disarmament, nuclear issues, or the security issues. And whereas all the women colleagues are supposed to take up the more soft, more down to earth, and more social issues. So I think that the working in the church, in the Catholic Church, probably, yes, produce the double constraint, being a Catholic in the clerical, the church, and also as a woman. So if I may, I'd like to ask Sister Nathalie Becquart, who represents the women leadership in the church, about about your personal assessment or stories, how you feel working in the church as the women religious leader, but at the same time at the very highest level of the leadership. What are the actual limitations, and how did you deal with those limitations, and what do you see the future of the women leadership in the church? Thank you.
Thank you for your difficult question. You know, I would like to highlight the church is like many of our families. You have the best, you have also sometimes difficult issues, and so it really depends on where you are, with whom you are working, and so I have wonderful experience to work with some priests, bishops, cardinals, in some places, in a very collaborative way, as really brothers and sisters in Christ, and with sometimes other, it's much more difficult because also of their culture, of their education, of their background. So I think about this question, you know, for me, the difference between maybe men and women, and I agree, we don't have to essentialize it, but there is a kind of mystery of this difference. It's a kind of matrix of all kinds of differences. And when we are together to work together, it's not only we are a man or a woman, that's true. It's our age, it's our culture, it's our education. So there are many things that that are part of that will make it or not easy to work together in this collaborative listening style. So I think it's more complex, even if, so I have the best experiences, and of course I have also very difficult experiences, like many women, but also many men. You know, when you listen to them, sometimes it's not they don't want, but because we are different by many ways. So how to deal with that? My journey is, yes, it's an adventure, it's very rich, and we are, and I'm very convinced of that, we are always, always, always better together in leadership team, working in teams than just the men alone or the women alone. So we have to find ways. But it's also, as a Christian, I live that as a Paschal journey. It's to follow Christ also in his, and sometimes it calls us for a lot of abnegation, humility, and yes, to deal with frustration, sufferings, and but there is, for me, there is no other way, even if it's sometimes very difficult, that to continue to try to work together as church and as humanity. So the more we can dialogue and understand each other, it will help. So that's why I think and a day like this is important, because at the end of the day, it's about also a culture of naming things, the good things and the difficult, and having also the difficult conversation, and being open to, yes, to have conversation and to to continue to understand each other, and based on this reciprocity. That's what.
Thank you, Sister Nathalie. And I just want to highlight a really important point which that question and your answer draws out, which is we recognize, and we've talked about, the risks of essentializing the female experience, the risks of essentializing what it means to be a woman in leadership. I think it's also good to be reminded of the risk of essentializing the challenges that we face, right? It's easy to become adversarial. It's easy, to forget about sustaining openness when it's always a challenge. And I think remembering that the diversity of experiences that we encounter is just as rich as those that we wish to bring is really, really important. So thank you. I think we will go to a couple of questions from our online audience before we come to another question in the room.
Thank you. Yes, we have a question from Sir Samuel Zanakologo, who is the campaign manager at Caritas Africa. And he asks of the panel, are there practical examples, especially in Africa, where this conversation about promoting the church's mission more effectively and efficiently is taking place collaboratively with bishops, clerics, and women? What are the drivers of this positive approach, if any?
I've only been in Africa once, but I will just name one forum where this is happening, and I believe we have a speaker that's been involved with it later, Nontando, who is beaming in. So on a theological perspective, these issues are being raised, I'd say, in every Catholic Theological Association around the world, and there is a network of Catholic associations called INSECT. You won't forget that acronym, the International Network for Societies of Catholic Theology. We thought about changing it, but why would we? Thank you. That does, one, it works, the associations work individually, but that works together around themes like these. So for example, when this Evangelii Gaudium came out, we took 3 years to research into the theme of gender justice. Right now we're taking 3 years to work into colonial, so a post-colonial church, post-colonial theology, and we write a summary at the end of that of what's happening. So it's a forum that gathers the issues around these issues, just to name one.
I can just add very briefly that in many countries the synodal process has opened that kind of spaces through either, as I said, the diocesan synodal team or at the level of bishops' conference. And even I was part of that last year, the continental meeting for the synod for Africa. It was in Addis Ababa. There were in the room many bishops, of course, priests, but also many women, young women, older women, and we had really this conversation together. And you can read the final document of the synodal meeting for Africa. The question have been raised, and I have seen that from the beginning. That yes. I know, depending on the situation, as I said, it's not always easy, but at least the synod opens more and more spaces like this to really listen to each other together, and we see that, and it's done through many ways.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll go to another question in the room.
Thank you very much to the panelists for bringing to light really different dimensions of this topic. And I'm Elena Dini. I'm the Senior Program Manager of the John Paul II Center for Interreligious Dialogue. And I often actually find myself being asked about being a woman in the theological field and in the interreligious dialogue field. I'm very often asked about the specific contribution of women. And I have my issues with with that, with being framed in this way. And I think, thank you for the moderator for bringing back also this challenging side of essentializing. But while we hear the word essentializing, we're already quite on the side of saying, okay, we don't want to essentialize. My issue, for which I ask some more details and some more light to Dr. Heaney, is about the word complementarity. Because you named that, and you named it in the same sentence of complementarity and the risk of essentializing. And I would be very grateful if you could expand a little more on how do you theologically read this call to complementarity that we are often suggested by various leaders in the Catholic Church. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. Just briefly, it is a big topic. So I have to say, if we could pull apart, and we can't, the word complementarity, which I have no problem with, I think cultures complement one another, men and women complement, like there's lots of ways in which, and we are different across the spectrum. From what could complementarity theology as it has come to be known. So I did, and in my presentation I am taking issue with complementarity theology when we take it as a whole, not aspects of it, and this is where thinking is nuanced. I think there is a problem when, one, we try and contrast too radically the gender roles in the church, especially when those gender roles are built on power. We're all called to serve, for example, we're all called. So I think, and it has become, unfortunately, I feel like it's become like a knee-jerk reaction a little bit. I feel it built on Balthasar's theology, and I would like to say I really do use Balthasar because one of my work is in music. He's a great thinker, he's spiritual, he's brilliant in many ways. But in this space, I don't feel he was contrasted, and I'm drawing also on scholars when I say that. He came from an experience of building a community with Adrian von Speer, his relationship with Adrian von Speer, which was rich and gave the church an awful lot, but she was a mystic and he was the theologian, and therefore they built this really interesting framework of Petrine, male, female, which I think has insights to give us about intimacy, but if it is any metaphor that is literalized is unhelpful. So if God is only father, it's unhelpful. If God is father and mother and other realities, when one image or one model is used as the only one, especially in gender spaces, I think it causes problems. So right now, complementarity theology has come to represent like the whole baggage, I think. I'm not saying every person in there thinks it like that, but I think sometimes it's used that way. So the other issue that we would need to name, I think, is the issue of fear. So fear is a bad advisor. We're in a Jesuit space. in all discernment, fear is a bad advisor. And the emergence of complementarity theology, I think, emerged at the moment when the church was saying, no, women can't be ordained. I'm not entering into that issue. But I think they were looking for a way to theologically value women while saying you can't have power. Now, what I was saying is, let's rethink theology of priesthood. So we don't have all ministerial priesthood and power over here, and therefore women over here trying to give something different. And actually what Pope Francis is doing in these really important namings is showing us in practice, and sometimes theology follows canon law, we will actually find it happening. So when it's a contract and a construct altogether, and when it's fear-based in that, because I feel called to lead, I'm not a mother, I never will be, I'm religious, I'm called to be. So my call is different, and I want to lead in one way, and I love that my sister is leading as a mother in another way. We shouldn't be pitching against one another. We need to hear how different spiritualities can feed our understandings of leadership without making them adversarial. And I think sometimes they are. And at this moment, there's a lot of fear, and that isn't between men and women. It's between women as well. So we need to sit down and talk.
Thank you very much for all the questions so far and for these rich and nuanced answers. We have another question from the floor, if someone could pass over a microphone. And then we'll go to the other side of the room. There may be questions there as well.
Muchas gracias Buenas tardes, o bueno, en italiano todavía, buongiorno a tutti. Muy agradecida. Soy Teresa Subieta, embajadora de Bolivia ante la Santa Sede. Impactada, me parece que para recordar pasado mañana el Año Internacional de la Mujer y esta reflexión, y por eso el Papa va a pedirnos que esta reflexión, este análisis, esta toma de conciencia permanente sobre la misión de la mujer en el mundo, quiero felicitar a los organizadores. Muchísimas gracias. Voy a entender de toda esta participación de las ponentes que queremos volver a las fuentes del Evangelio. ¿Va a ser Jesús el primero o también el Dios Padre desde toda la historia de la salvación que va a poner a la mujer, nos va a poner a la mujer en el lugar que nos corresponde, en igualdad de condiciones con los varones, siempre? Y me gustó en una de las participaciones que se dijo en qué momento, porque una de sus fundamentaciones decía lo mismo que estoy diciendo yo ahora, en qué momento se desvió este planteamiento de la igualdad entre mujeres y varones. Porque si usted recuerda el Evangelio, y hace más de 2000 años Jesús, con las parábolas que nos ha enseñado y nos sigue enseñando, ahí está el punto justo de la igualdad entre varones y mujeres. La parábola de la mujer, el ejemplo de la mujer que sufrió el sangrado por más de 18 años y que le dice, mujer, levántate. Y se levanta. Nadie la había podido curar, pero él sí. O la mujer adúltera, que en sus costumbres, la mujer adúltera, si era pillada, encontrada en esa actitud, la mataban a pedradas. ¿Y qué hace Jesús? La pone en su lugar. Entonces, yo creo que es volver a las fuentes. Eso es teológico. Jesús nos va a enseñar la verdadera teología. O la primera discípula, María. María que fue, estamos diplomáticas aquí, la primera diplomática que va a hacer en las bodas de Canaán sus gestiones, va a ser un puente entre ese matrimonio que tenía invitados para que haga su milagro o realice la posibilidad de seguir dando vino en ese matrimonio. La inculturación del mismo Jesús en su pueblo. Por eso veo este día que va recordándonos la lucha de las mujeres por la igualdad de condiciones, no solo en el ámbito nuestro de la Iglesia Católica, que es universal, sino en todos los ámbitos. Y en Bolivia vamos a ver a mujeres antes del 50 que estaban prohibidas de aprender a leer y a escribir, mujeres e indígenas. Y que si encontraban algún indígena, sea mujer o varón, aprendiendo a leer, los dominadores les cortaban las manos. Y hoy en día Esas mujeres ya son universitarias, hoy en día ya son autoridades. Todavía nos falta mucho, es verdad. Todavía también dentro de nuestra Iglesia Católica nos falta mucho, porque no estamos las mujeres para buscar el poder. Cuando se habla de poder, se está hablando de empoderamiento. Las mujeres nos tenemos que empoderar junto con los varones, porque la lucha y la transformación de las estructuras dominantes de egoísmo, o lo que nuestro Papa Francisco va señalando cada día, la lucha por los cambios estructurales, proceso de cambio que va a durar, pero gracias por darnos este día para seguir reflexionando, para seguir tomando conciencia y para lograr cambios importantes. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Thank you for those reflections, Ambassador, and for reminding us again of this idea that we've heard about already this morning, this idea that moving forward also means reconnecting. And I wonder if that speaks as well to this sense of how we can overcome fear. Sometimes there's a limitation around moving forward that's about fear, and I wonder if this idea that we're not moving towards something totally unknown, but actually sometimes moving towards reconnecting with things that we already know and understand can be helpful to us. So we'll take another question from over there. Thank you very much, and that might be our last one.
Thank you. Actually, to continue on the words of Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Bolivia, I wanted to follow up on the comments made about the Amazonian Synod. The situation in the Abya Yala, also known as Latin America, with the church and with young women, indigenous specifically, is something that, building towards a brighter future, I would like to know from anyone who would like to answer what that looks like tangibly. Because I think many times we hear discourse as young people and as indigenous youth. We hear a lot of promises, we hear a lot of great intentions, but our roles are never defined in that process. What does that process look like? What does that collaboration look like? Thank you.
A difficult question. Another challenging question, so thank you. Who would like to give it a try?
Well, I don't have an answer, but I think what we understand more and more is that the way forward, as it has been said in different ways, is how we move from a pattern of domination, competition, and we know since many centuries we were in a male-dominated society, to a pattern of cooperation, more collaboration, reciprocity, and for me, I think the things are linked. That means it touches also our ways to relate to the earth, the way we relate as men and women together. Is also touch also the way we relate to the earth. So that's why it's an all, and then at the end, it's also, the future will be opened by the new generation and all together. It's about also how we educate kids, young men and women, how we move forward. So I think we all have a role to play, starting from where we are, how we unfold those new paths. It's Laudato Si, it's synodality, it's also the way we understand ourselves with a dynamic, open identity that is not stuck in one way, but we discern together. And we listen personally. And I would say, for all of us, it's a path of conversion. That's why it's not easy. It's a path of transformation, and it's a path of conversion, and we all have to, just to continue to discern together.
Thank you, Sister Nathalie, for articulating something which I think for me at least has been kind of burning bright in the back of my mind throughout the morning. We've talked about how kind of recognizing the role that women can play in leadership has the potential to be transformative, not just in the relationship between men and women, but also more broadly in the way that we envisage diversity as a source of wealth, as a source of encounter, rather than as a challenge. And I think another thing is that so many of the points we're touching on today, these ideas of reciprocity, of moving on from relationships of oppression, moving on from kind of power as a heavy-handed instrument of control, all of these things speak so deeply as well to our relationship with the planet, to our relationship with our common home. And so this idea of, women's leadership as a template for a different form of relationality, I think it goes well beyond kind of social relationships and speaks as well to our relationship in the context of an integral ecology. Are there any more questions before we break for lunch? Yes. One more, Sister Mamalifa. Somebody will bring you a microphone in just a moment.
So thank you very much for your enlightening sharing. That has helped me to understand certain issues. But there is something I have always questioned myself, I've never understood, and I think it is in relation to theology maybe. And the issue is, when it comes to the Catholic Church, we put Mary up there, the Mother of God, our mother, so wonderful. But the women in the church are put down there. So I have been asking myself, why that contrast? Mary was a woman. She is a woman who played a very important role in the church. And we recognize her leadership. Why does the church not recognize the value of women we see every day, and we only hold on to the value of the woman who played that important role? Maybe this is what you thought in theology, or is it practice? I would like some light on that. Thank you.
That's probably the question of the day. But just two things. Feminist theologies, there's many of them. Some of them would say that's precisely the paradox in that the church, because it can't, and I'm going to give two different views here, because we can't handle women on the ground. We put Mary and women up there and forget that she was a real woman. So there is an expression which my mind is, no, it's not coming to my mind, but anyway. So a kind of a way out, which I think is probably part of it. But I also think it is interesting that the role of Mary in the Catholic Church seems for me to be deeply in our DNA. One writer that I read gave me insight into that question, and I'm not going to answer it, but it did give me insight. Rosemary Houghton, beautiful 20th century thinker, she said, in the early church, to go back to Jesus and the early church. In the early church, women had a new sense of themselves. It was there's no Hebrew, there's no Jew, there's no man. That there was a new reality, and women sensed that, and men sensed that about the women. So there was a liberation there that, if we were to really trace historically, we see that that wasn't continued in the way that perhaps Jesus imagined it. Now, there's lots of theology needed there, but I'd like to suggest that is the case. She suggests that the pushing through of Mary as symbolic in the Catholic Church is one way in which we resisted the feminine or the female not being accepted. I'm not saying it solves it. I think it's a paradox we need to hold and a journey we need to have. But I found that interesting. There is an equality in Christ that we are called to live. We don't know how. We didn't know how. It came before its time. It was a breakthrough before its time, and it got kind of quashed. And somehow Mary is holding the light until we catch up. Just 2 images as a response.
Thank you so much. I think we will end there for this. Oh, one more very quick question. We will. In fact, okay, I see we have 2 hands up. So let's take just the 2 questions together, if that's okay, and answer them in 3 minutes. Thank you.
Ya estamos sobre el tiempo, ¿verdad? Voy a ser concreta. Soy Ruperta, la hermana Ruperta de México. Me viene a la mente de toda esta mañana que estuvimos acá, que ha sido una mañana muy rica, pensar en cómo seguir avanzando, pasar de estos discursos a la práctica. Muchas cosas ya están andando, pero todavía nos falta mucho que seguir construyendo. Por otro lado, también cómo dar continuidad a esos procesos que en Francisco, no solamente con él, ha venido. La verdad, hay cierto temor a que llegue otro líder en la Iglesia Católica y frene esos procesos. ¿Sí? Se teme eso. Hablando de América Latina, en América Latina vamos caminando con mucha resistencia estos procesos. En México, solamente la diócesis de San Cristóbal tiene una vicaria de pastoral. Fuera de ahí no existe eso, no se conoce. Hay muchísima resistencia. Entonces, ¿cómo seguir avanzando en estos procesos? Gracias.
Gracias. Y si pudiera pasar el micrófono a la compañera ahí detrás, ya vamos directamente a la otra pregunta.
Grazie, vorrei prima ringraziare a tutti quanti per questa davvero fantastica conferenza che purtroppo per questi altri obblighi non possiamo seguire nel pomeriggio. Non ce l'ho domanda, però la domanda della nostra collega mi ha fatto un po' di riflettere. Diciamo, in leader non sono stata però ho fatto un po' di carriera, ma quando hanno paragonato la Madre di Dio, la Maria, abbiamo riflettuto che lei è un leader mondiale e noi invece nella Chiesa cattolica, ma figuriamoci nelle altre chiese, diciamo, non hanno questo ruolo. Io penso sinceramente, ma da cuore, che noi ce l'abbiamo, perché la Maria ce l'ha il suo ruolo importantissimo perché è Madre di Dio. E noi già con il ruolo di avere possibilità di essere madri abbiamo questo ruolo e nessuno ce lo può togliere. E non dobbiamo lamentarci, diciamo, forse non è la nostra posizione così difficile nel mondo come la vogliamo qualche volta anche mettere. Siamo riusciti abbastanza, dobbiamo essere molto contenti con il percorso che abbiamo fatto, c'è la strada di fare, ovviamente, sempre e comunque, però anche tra le noi donne io penso che si deve un pochino lavorare e dopo con calma e dopo proseguire, non correre tanto, perché magari dobbiamo riflettere sul nostro ruolo di madri che è importantissimo, già mi mette da una posizione molto alta. Grazie.
Thank you very much. So any responses to either of those points?
Io penso che le due domande... penso... English? I'll go in English, of course, yeah. Sorry. I think that the 2 interventions go together. I think it's absolutely right that we're journeying and we need to celebrate what we're journeying. And I think the essential role as mothers and the role of Mary and the role of parents, I think we need to celebrate that as a leadership role. It is absolutely a leadership role. I think the fear is shared. And I rest on hope there and trust. And the fact that things are happening that we cannot forget. Symbol precedes thought for me. So what happens if there is a change? Well, we have seen a synod with people sitting around a table, talking and voting. There are things that are happening that we can't unhappen. And I'd like to trust that in all things the Spirit will move us forward. It doesn't mean that sometimes there is push and pull. And it is true that there are sectors in our church that are more open and others that aren't. So for me, prayer, faith, but also what has been done has been done. So I draw hope from changes that have happened in leadership. We know it's possible because it has been possible, and therefore that will change culture, even if we're still struggling to catch up.
Thank you so much. So with that, I would like us to give a final warm round of applause to our panelists for their wonderful contributions. We will break for lunch, which will be served downstairs again, so you can go back to the reception area and you'll be indicated through to the lunchroom. We will rejoin at 5 minutes to 2 o'clock so that we can start as punctually as we did for this morning's session. Thank you all so much and see you after lunch.